Hey beautiful people, what is up? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome to another video. For today's video, I'm going to be doing something a little different, a little new for me, but because I've had so many requests about this in my DMs on Instagram as well as on YouTube, I wanted to come and do a separate video specifically looking at the Byredo Bibliophilia palette compared to the Natasha Denona Dramatic Palette. Alright, so let me just give you guys a little bit of a synopsis. So basically, Natasha Denona and Byredo released, I would say, two very, I don't want to call them similar, but two similar-ish palettes. And by that I mean they released two neutral-leaning palettes around the same time. And considering that Natasha Denona and Byredo are both luxury brands, they're on the pricier side of things. So if you were interested in figuring out which is the right palette for you, I'm hoping that this video can help you understand it across a couple different categories. What I really want to spend some time diving into is the packaging of this, of both of these palettes, the formulas that's included in both of these palettes, the performance, so the quality in terms of how they perform on the face, the price point, and then finally wrap things up with like what my thoughts are, which I would choose. And clearly I bought both, so I chose both, but if I could only pick one, there is a clear answer to that. So I'm hoping that hearing my thoughts on these palettes can help you guys decide what's the best option for you. And I will make sure to timestamp this video particularly so you can jump to whatever section in case you are interested in only one aspect. So let's start off first with packaging. So as you can see here, they have very, very different packaging. In terms of size, I would say that it's very clear the Byredo is a much, much larger palette. The Natasha Denona is really nice and compact. And this might be important to you if you are somebody that travels and you need something that's on the smaller, more compact, more travel-friendly size. That being said, I don't think that this is uncomfortable, and weight-wise, they weigh about the same in my hands, I would say. So this isn't like a heavier palette by any means. So again, here you can see them next to each other. Let's talk about sort of like what they look like. The Byredo palette has a sort of metallic reflective finish with a really nice print at the front, but it is reflective all the way through. And in the back, it does include some product details, mainly the shades and as well as like the shelf life and where this was made. So it does include a little bit of details on the back. However, on the Natasha Denona side, I would say this is plastic, but heavy plastic packaging. So it's a very nice heavy plastic packaging. On the back it is clear, and that is because you do have holes on the back where each of the individual shades in this palette is removable. Now this, again, really nice and helpful for those who travel, particularly if you have other Natasha Denona palettes and you want to create your own customizable palettes. You can pop out the shades that you need, pop out the shades you don't need, pop in the ones that you need, and have a really nice palette to go. I will say, even though this is plastic, very, very, very high quality. And one of the nice things about the Natasha Denona packaging compared to the Byredo is that with this being so reflective, it picks up fingerprints to no end. So it doesn't look nice and clean and crisp all the time. This is really nice and crisp, and you can easily wipe things off once it gets dirty, which I appreciate that. Now, I do want to open it up so you can see the inside of both of these. So again, sticking with Natasha Denona, let's just open her up. We have a nice little magnetic closure on the front. It does have a really nice big giant mirror, so that's great. And this opens all the way, so it can open completely flat if that is something that matters to you. In terms of how these shades are laid out, you get minimal space between the shades, so not a lot of wasted space in this palette. You'll see that we have, what is this? 18 shades in total, and all of the shades are labeled based on the undertone. So one of the interesting things about this palette is that the shades don't have shade names like typical palettes do, but they're labeled by undertone and depth. So W equaling warm, Y equaling yellow, R red, P peach, and neutral, C cool. And all of the ones that are labeled with 2, those are all of the shimmers. Now, on the Byredo side, however, when you open this again, you get a really nice magnetic opening here. Also comes with a very large, really great quality mirror. And here you have all of the shades. Similar and even kind of better than the Natasha Denona. There's zero wasted space in this palette at all whatsoever. So every single inch is covered in terms of like shades. You also get 18 shades in this palette. And there is no shade names on the palette itself. If you want to figure out what the shades names are, you're going to have to go to the back and kind of like constantly be flipping back and forth. I don't know if y'all care about that. For me, it doesn't really matter. I don't really care for shade names. The biggest probably downside to this, and this might be, again, depending on how you choose to utilize this palette, is that this is a static palette. You can't take the shades out. You can't move them around. There's no sort of rearranging with it. And what I've noticed with this palette and with the others is that the shades in this seem to be baked into the palette. So what I experienced with this, and I would say at least one of the other limited edition Byredo palettes that I have, is that sometimes the shades kind of like puff out, and this one's actually doing it. And when I got it, it was doing it. So I constantly have to like press it back in to make sure it stays into the pan. I'm not sure if it's how these are packaged or like how, if they're baked into the pan or whatever, but that has been an issue that I've dealt with this one and at least one other palette. And to be fair, when my palette arrived, I ordered this from Nordstrom, and it was in a bubble mailer, like just like the envelope kind, no other additional protection. I'm genuinely surprised that none of the shades came broken, because the way in which it arrived, I was like, this is ghetto as hell, and how dare you. Like, not even a single shred of protection was on this palette. So it was sheer luck that this arrived in such good condition that it did, because Lord alone knows. All right, so we've talked a little bit about packaging. Let's dive into formula. So starting with the Byredo palette, one thing you can probably tell just by looking at it is that there are several different formulas in this palette. And I'm saying several, but honestly, it's just 3. So the palette comes with 3 specific formulas. There's the velvety matte formula, there's the satin formula, and then there's the shimmer formula. And I will say that I absolutely enjoyed every single one of these. The mattes are very, very creamy, but not like a cream to powder, but they do have a very creamy texture in terms of there's no real kick up or anything when you dip your brush into it, which is what you would get with traditional powder mattes. So in applying that matte to the eye, I've had a really good time with it. I actually have been using this one as a standalone pretty consistently all week. Like, it's the matte that I'm using in this look today. And this isn't even done using the Byredo palette. I just reached in for this matte because it genuinely is a good matte. In terms of the satins, oh, I can't tell you guys how much I enjoy the satins in this palette. And you'll see in my sort of static review of the Byredo palette, I talk about this in kind of comparison to the Pat McGrath satins. One of the things with satin shadows that I appreciate if it's done well is that you can blend it out and it performs like a matte. So it can do the dual function of being a shimmer as well as a matte. And not every brand knows how to do that well, but the Byredo palette I think does it exceptionally well. So even though there are very few, in my opinion, mattes in this palette, the satins do perform like mattes with a little bit of that sheen to it when you blend it up. But it's absolutely phenomenal, absolutely stunning. And then lastly, the shimmer formula. These shimmers are shimming. I don't know what I expected, and I think maybe I had forgotten what the Byredo formula was, or the previous palettes didn't have this much shine and impact, but the shine and impact of the just standard shimmers in this palette are exceptional, particularly on my darker complexion. I will make sure to link my static reviews or my individual reviews of each of these palettes if you want to deep dive just on one and not the other. But if you see how those shimmers are on my eyes in terms of the punch and the pigment, chef's kiss. Absolute chef's kiss. Now, one of the things that I've seen people mention in terms of the formula of this is that there seems to be a lot of shades that are very, very similar. And I agree. Yes, there are some similar shades, but I think the big difference when it comes to the similarity in the shades is that the shades may be similar in color, but the formula is different. And I think that that matters because of how very distinct these formulas are and how they perform on the eye. So honestly, I have nothing bad to say about the Byredo formula in any of the 3 different finishes that I mentioned. So I do think that you would fall in love with using this formula. It feels very unique. It feels very different. It feels like not something that's not already on the market. So you can already tell I love the formula of the Byredo palette. But let's talk about the formula of the Natasha Denona palette. Now, if you know, you know. Tasha, Patricia's younger cousin, I'm just making that up, guys. But Natasha, she creates just beautiful eyeshadow. Like, there's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. Is it my favorite eyeshadow formula? No. But I do think it's a really, really good eyeshadow formula. I will say in the earlier days of Natasha Denona palettes, I felt like there was some inconsistencies in the quality. But in her more recent releases, I would say in the last year or two, she has been very consistent in terms of the quality of the formula being just exceptional. Like, the formula is just being very consistently good. So I can't say anything bad about the formula of the Natasha Denona palette. Now, in terms of, like, let's talk about the specific formulas that we're getting here. So you do get very basic, traditional, standard mattes. There is a cream to powder matte. And I think that is something that Natasha Denona popularized. And I will say the cream to powder matte in this palette is the best that I've ever used from her. One of the issues that I had with old Natasha Denona palettes is that the cream to powder mattes look extremely rich in terms of depth in the palette, but then when you apply them onto the eyes, that color tends to like fade and it appears way lighter on the eyes. And that might work for some people, but as someone with a darker complexion, it wasn't working for me. So I was really excited by the fact that the cream to powder matte that was included in this palette performed almost exactly the same on the eyes. The transfer was there. So I didn't have to worry about that fading into a completely lighter color than what was represented in the pan. In terms of the finishes of the shimmers, I would say there's not as much versatility in this as compared to the Byredo palette. There are two, I can't even call them satins, that would be fair. I think that there are two finishes in terms of the shimmers that I kind of experience. The first are the ones with the larger particles, and you can probably tell just by looking at them. And these have the higher impact, higher shine. And then the ones with smaller, more finely milled particles, these still perform as shimmers on the eyes. They still show up as shimmers, but leaning a little bit closer to the satin side. So you do get some versatility in that regard. There are no like toppery shades or anything in this palette, but I feel like I appreciate the formulas in the Byredo palette a little bit more than the formula in the Natasha Denona palette. I think that I could more easily replicate this palette with others in my collection than the Byredo palette, if that makes sense. And even using Natasha Denona's own line, because she does have a number of neutral palettes. I would say this isn't new for her. There's the I Need a Nude, I Need a Warm, the Gold, the bronze palette, and there's another, like, there's so many neutral / nude, the Bieber palette. There's so many of those neutral palettes in Natasha's collection that I feel like this is just another one, and the formula doesn't necessarily stand out to me. Is it good? Absolutely, 100%. Performance, quality, impeccable. But it doesn't stand out to me formula-wise as much as the Byredo palette. So let's recap. Packaging, I give 1 point to Natasha Denona for winning that category. Formula, I give 1 point to Byredo for winning that category. Okay, next up, let's talk about performance and quality. And I started talking about this a little bit with both of these palettes. In terms of the performance and the quality of the Byredo palette, let's start there. There's nothing bad I can say with this. I didn't experience any duds in this palette in terms of blendability and longevity. All of the shades that I used, all the shades that I swatched, applied beautifully. I would say when I applied the shades to my eyes, I didn't experience any patchiness. I didn't experience any like major fallout. Everything just did exactly what it was supposed to do. So I had no qualms or like challenges when it came to the quality of this palette. And I felt like it was very consistent with the previous Byredo palettes that I've had in my collection. So I want to give 1 point to Byredo for performance and quality. On the Natasha Denona side, I also want to give it a point, you guys. These shades just performed. They just did what they were supposed to do. I had no issues in terms of blendability or longevity. I didn't experience any fading or any sort of like weird fallout or anything with this palette. It performed exactly as expected for a luxury palette, and there were no duds. So I want to give 1 point to Natasha Denona as well, because from a performance and a quality standpoint, these both tie. You can't go wrong with either of these. Okay, now finally, let's talk about the price. And I think this is probably the biggest sticking point for many people, because both of these palettes are not necessarily on the cheap side. So let's start with the Byredo Bibliophilia palette. This palette retails for $115. This, I'm pretty sure, is the exact same price that last year's limited edition palette was. And I do want to say that I think, even though it sounds like a ridiculous price point, that the price of this is actually exceptional. And let me give you guys some context as to why. Byredo only releases one of these giant palettes every year. All of their other makeup, all of their other eyeshadow palettes are these quints, these 5-pan palettes, and those retail for $75. So taking that into account, where like a 5-pan palette is $75 and you get 18 shades for $115, the math is mathing. You can't go wrong in terms of the price of this, because it's just so much better than what their standard palettes are. Also, I do think that you are getting really, really gorgeous finishes in this palette. Now, if this palette was primarily mattes and not like the satins or the shimmers in their really unique formula, I would probably feel a little bit more in terms of some kind of way, because I think we all know mattes are cheaper to produce than shimmers. So they typically can bring down the price point of a palette. But I do think that because we have so many shimmers, so many satins in this palette, it's predominantly shimmers and satins, that the price point makes sense. Now, if you are concerned about the price, I do want to flag that some of the retailers, which are the standard retailers that they're available at, like the Nordstroms, they will oftentimes have like a beauty sale where you can get 15% off, and that can help bring the price point down. But I can't complain and say that this isn't worth the money, considering the quality and the amount of shades, and comparing it to its own sort of lineup of luxury eyeshadow palettes. I think that the price of this is actually appropriate. On the flip side, let's talk about the price point of the Natasha Denona palette. Now, this palette retails for $82. I don't know how I feel about this. I think that this is too expensive for Natasha Denona. Now, hear me out. The typical Natasha Denona palettes, which are her 15-pan eyeshadow palettes. Now, again, you get 15 shades in those palettes. This one you're getting 18, so yes, you're getting 3 more shades. But those 15-pan palettes retail for $69. And not only that, I do feel like the matte to shimmer ratio is what's confusing me in terms of the price point. Because yes, the 15-pan palettes are $69. This new palette is $82, which means that it is, how much more? $12, $13 more for 3 shades, 2 of which are matte. I mean, I guess it's not terrible. But I feel like this would have been much better as like a $75 palette as opposed to an $82 palette. And I'm saying this again because I feel like 2/3 of this palette is mattes. And of the 6 shimmers that we're getting, we don't get any multi-chromes, which you can actually find in some of the 15-pan eyeshadow palettes. These are all sort of like, I would say these are standard shimmers with 2 that lean a little bit more on the satin side. There's no toppers in here. There are no toppers in here, and there are no multi-chromes in here. And she does have those special shades in her other palettes, which retail for cheaper. So in terms of the price, I don't know if this is necessarily the best value from a Natasha Denona palette. And considering that this is simply a neutral palette, I think you could buy I Need a Warm or the bronze palette and achieve similar looks, or honestly, like the exact same looks, using those palettes which retail for cheaper. But I want to know your thoughts if you got that same sense or that same feeling. Now, that being said, I think this is the easiest palette to find on sale. The Sephora VIB sale is coming up, and if you are Rouge, you can get 20% off. And Ulta, Natasha Denona is also available at Ulta. Ulta oftentimes has a 20% coupon just floating out in the ether, so you could always get 20% off. And I did see there was one other retailer that had 30% off, which brought that palette down to $52, $55, which is even cheaper than her like standard palettes. So there are opportunities to not have to pay full price. There are more opportunities to not have to pay full price for this compared to this palette. And this is a standard, as I understand it. This is not limited edition, so this will always be available, so you don't have to rush and purchase this. Whereas the Byredo palettes are truly limited edition. Once they're gone, they're gone. They don't come back at all. So that might be something additional that you want to take into account when deciding which one you want to spend your money on. So that being said, even though the Natasha Denona palette is cheaper technically, I want to give the price point 1 point to Byredo for price. Okay, so we've hit all of the major sort of categories that I think folks might be interested in learning about in terms of helping to determine which palette you pick up. So which do I choose? Again, like I said, I chose both because I absolutely love neutral palettes. I absolutely love the Byredo limited edition palettes. They are some of my favorite to collect and to use, not just collect. And I think Natasha Denona has a very great, consistent, reliable formula. So for me, I knew that I was going to get a ton of use out of both of these. However, if I only had the funds to pick one palette, I know I would pick the Byredo Bibliophilia palette. And for a couple of reasons. You could probably tell from how I assigned the points and how I laid out the categories. I think probably the main reason that this one stood out to me is the uniqueness of the formulas in this palette. As someone who has a pretty large Natasha Denona collection, this is nice to have like a very dedicated palette for darker complexions, because in her review she said very clearly that she wanted a palette that people with deeper complexions could use just on its own. There would be no throwaway shades. So it's nice to have this very curated palette that is specifically designed for darker complexions. I appreciate that. But I also want to say that I could probably achieve these looks with the Natasha Denona palettes that I already have in my collection. And considering that all of her palettes are customizable, if I were to take the darker shades or the shades that were more appropriate for me from I Need a Nude or Bronze or any of like the very neutral palettes that I already own from Natasha Denona, I could probably create a palette that works for my darker complexion with zero throwaway shades. The fact that the Byredo feels unique and different and new and special is why I would choose this one. And it truly is limited edition. So I'm also weighing the fact that if I wanted to pick up the Natasha Denona palette later, I absolutely could. But because this is so limited edition and once it's gone, I know that this would have been my only opportunity to buy. Now, that being said, I don't want you guys to like go out and rush and buy this just as a FOMO thing because it is limited edition. Really like weigh all of the categories that I just talked about to decide if this is the palette for you. Mainly, are you going to use this? Is this going to add something to your collection? Even though I think the shades and the formulas on this palette are very unique, it's a neutral palette. And if I know you all are like me and we are the same person, we all have like 50,000,011 neutral palettes in our collection and we don't need another one. So don't feel like you have to rush and purchase this simply because it is limited edition. Genuinely, truly think about if you're going to enjoy the performance, if this is going to add something to your collection. Because $115, even though it's cheaper than even though price-wise it's more economic than their standard palettes, it's still a lot of money to drop on a palette because we still got to add tax onto that as well. So please be mindful of that. Do I regret picking up either of these palettes? No, I absolutely don't. I'm having the best time playing in these, and I think that regardless of whether you choose Byredo or Natasha Denona, you will enjoy either of these palettes as well. All right, you guys, so that's it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed this sort of dedicated comparison video on both of these palettes. Let me know if you'd like me to do comparison videos like this on other brands as well, or other palettes as well. So if there are 2 other palettes that you're weighing and you wanted me to do this sit down deep dive based on these specific categories, I'd be happy to do this. I actually had a lot of fun going through and thinking very critically about the differences between these 2 palettes, and I would be happy to do it with others as well. Okay, so let me know down in the comments below which of these palettes you plan on picking up or have picked up. Did you pick up Natasha, Byredo, both, none at all? I want to know all of that in the comments below. And if you don't know what to comment, as always, leave me let's leave a brown heart this time. And I'm saying brown because both of these are neutral palettes. So let's do a brown heart this time, but I will always accept orange hearts because you know I feel about a good orange heart. Anyways, as always, thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate you all so much more than you know, and I'll catch you in my next one. Bye, guys.